Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, School of Ancient Wisdom. Who is there? Aniket?
Sir, it's Aniket, sir.
Hello?
Sir, it's Aniket, sir.
Yeah, can you make me and Binaji as the host, co-host?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Done, sir.
Okay, thank you. Kindly mute yourself. Binaji, can we start? Can we start, Binaji,
Yes.
with the universal prayer?
Yeah.
O hidden light, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May each who feels himself as one with thee know he is also one with every other. Om Bhuvasvaha. Om Tatsaviturvarenyam. Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi. Dhiyo Yo Nः Prachodayat. Om Bhuvasvaha. Om Tatsaviturvarenyam. Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi. धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्. ॐ भूर्भुवस्वः. ॐ तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्. असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतंगमय. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good morning, everybody. Namaskar. Thank you to the School of Ancient Wisdom and Binaji for organizing this at a short notice of less than 24 hours.
Thank you, Krishna Parinji, for telling us.
No, I was anyway talking on this subject on the Shivratri day.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that was in Telugu and it was not recorded also.
Oh, okay.
So when Umeshji raised that point, I thought it's a good opportunity for us to discuss the Shiva Tattva
Yeah.
with our participants from the School of Ancient Wisdom.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. The term Shiva etymologically means three things. One is auspiciousness. That which is auspicious is called as Shiva. That which is goodness and peace is also called as Shiva. And that which is for the welfare of the entire creation is also indicated in this word Shiva. Generally, when somebody is going on a journey, there is a benediction which says, Shivaste panthanas santu. Let your paths be peaceful. is a benediction that is normally given. Shivaste panthanas santu. Shiva therefore means that which is Mangalakara. Mangala means auspicious. Similarly, it is Kalyanakara. Kalyanakara means that which is for the welfare of the whole creation. And it is also called as something which is Shubhakara. Shubhakara means that which is good. Shubha. We use these terms Mangala, Shubha, and Kalyana. In almost all the Indian languages, you find these three words. So this, it actually means that. See, what we need to understand is that, as I was mentioning yesterday, Shiva from the ultimate point of view, from the unmanifest point of view, is called as the ultimate reality or the universal consciousness. And that which is beyond manifestation. Essentially, this is what Shiva is. So it is actually a principle. And that principle in manifestation comes in as Maheshwara. And also in the Ardhanarishwara form. This is what we need to remember, that from the unmanifest point of view, it refers to the ultimate reality and universal consciousness. And in manifestation, we see the predominance of the Shakti aspect. Shiva includes within himself, and it is something which is inherent in Shiva, is the Shakti Tattva. The Shakti is inherent in him, and in the unmanifest form, it is in a potential form. In the unmanifest state, it's in a potential form. In manifestation, it is the Shakti which predominates, which dominates the whole thing. And in manifestation, Shiva can only function through Shakti. This is another important aspect to be remembered. In manifestation, Shiva does not function independently. He functions only through Shakti. That is the symbology in the Ardhanarishwara form which is given to us. So we are actually going to talk about the symbology, the allegory, and the imagery and all that. But we also need to remember that this symbology, this allegory, and the imagery that is projected or given to us about Shiva, Parvati, Shakti, different forms of Shakti and different forms of Shiva, is something for the purpose of having a mental grasp of things. That which is beyond manifestation cannot be grasped. And that which is beyond the mind also cannot be grasped. If it is totally abstract, the mind cannot grasp. So, in order to allow the mind to grasp some aspects of that divinity, that ultimate reality, lot of symbols, lot of images, lot of allegory is used. But we should not be caught in the allegory, caught in the symbols, and caught in the images that are projected. They have a purpose and a limited reality of their own. But they should not be dominant in our understanding. So fundamentally, the Shiva Tattva is to be understood at two levels. One is at the unmanifest level. It is that ultimate reality and universal consciousness. And in manifestation, a duality will appear as the Shiva Shakti Tattva, and it manifests only through the Shakti Tattva in the creation. As I said, Shiva cannot act independently in the creation without the association and concurrence in some form with the Shakti aspect of it. This is one fundamental point which we need to understand about the Shiva Tattva. Then comes into the realm of manifestation. The threefold aspect of Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshwara appear. When we are talking about the Trimurtis, he is not referred to as Shiva. He is referred to as Maheshwara. It is the Brahma, the masculine aspect of the creative principle, which is concerned with the material creative force and manifestation of all that is material. That is the Brahma. I made this point very clear several times. The ultimate reality is also referred to as Brahman. And in the Shiva Tattva, it is referred to as Shiva. And Brahman is a neuter gender term. Whereas in manifestation, when it comes down as the threefold dimension or manifestation of that reality, Brahma is a masculine gender term which refers to the creator, and he creates only the material form. The Vishnu aspect of it creates the life form. We need to make a slight distinction between life and consciousness. Life principle is also a relative and limited manifestation of consciousness, which is conditioned to the extent that the life principle cannot operate independently without association with the material form or the body. I hope I am making myself very, very clear. Unless there is a material form, the life principle cannot be discerned or distinguished or identified in its own abstract form. It can only be seen or becomes visible when it is associated with matter. Yes, madam.
Krishnapanaji, is it right to say this is Chitta?
Not exactly Chitta. We'll come to Chitta later on.
All right.
We'll come to Chitta later on. But basically, what I'm trying to say is, I'm trying to make a slight distinction between life form and consciousness. Life and consciousness. Essentially, they are one and the same. But when I'm talking about consciousness, I'm talking about a much higher dimension of it. The life principle operates through material forms only. That means unless there is a body, you cannot make out the life form. However dormant it may be, because we see that there are some places in the deserts in US and elsewhere where rocks also move. So what is life? Life principle, we have seen that there are 6 aspects to it. Asti, jayate, vardhate, viparinamate, apakshiyate, and mriyate. These are the 6 aspects that indicate life. The first aspect is that it is there. Asti. It is there. This life principle is universally, it is all pervasive. That is the meaning of Vishnu also. Vishnu means etymologically that which is all pervading. That's why the Vishnu Sahasranama starts with Vishwam Vishnur Vashatkara. He is pervading the whole Vishwa. So first of all, he is there. That principle of life is there. How do we discern it? Because it is born. Jayate. We see a body associated with life is born, like a child, like any other creature, even in the form of an egg, even in the form of an insect. And it has this mobility also. Then it has this aspect of growth, vardhate. It grows. And it modifies itself, viparinamate. It changes. Then it decays. And finally it dies. Along with this, we also see 2 important things about life. One is, as I said, mobility. If something is moving on its own, through its own inner force, we say it is alive. Isn't it? Whether it's an insect or an ant or a bird or any creature, when it has got this ability to move on its own, we say life is there. The second aspect which we find about life is its ability to reproduce itself. Its ability to reproduce of its own forms. That means human beings give birth to human beings, birds give birth to birds, insects give birth to insects. So there is this aspect of reproduction. So through this life is manifested. This is the Vishnu aspect of it. Then the third dimension is this Maheshwara. You see the term also. Maha means great, which is stupendous, which is enormous, humongous, very large, beyond our imagination. This is Maha. Ishvara means Lord. Maheshwara means the great or the infinite Lord or the humongously large principle which rules over everything, which is the aspect of consciousness. This consciousness has an independent existence of itself, which in a conditioned form appears as life. Hope I am making myself very clear. Please, if there is any clarification to be clarification needed, please ask me a question. Life manifestation, the manifestation of the life principle is a conditioned aspect of consciousness. Maheshwara as a tattva, as a principle, who is Shiva in manifestation, is the principle associated with this universal consciousness in manifestation, which is again all pervasive. And in fact, the ultimate reality is not different from universal consciousness, even in the unmanifest state. And even in the manifested state, the Atma, which is again an entity which is individual in certain respects, but essentially of the nature of the ultimate reality or the universal consciousness. So we can, for the sake of our own imagination, we can say that the Atma is like an atom. Is like an atom, an individual entity which embodies all the essential features of the universal consciousness. But it operates under limitation again, because it's in manifestation. That is why the very first sutra in the Shiva Sutras is Chaitanyam Atma. Chaitanya is that universal consciousness, is Atma. And I have mentioned earlier also, but for the sake of repetition, I am again mentioning here that it is this Maheshwara Tattva, or this principle of Maheshwara, which is responsible for universal consciousness, for self-consciousness of an individual, of a human being. We have seen earlier that except the human being, all other creatures are conscious, but not self-conscious as a human being is. Human being always has at the background of his mind that I am there, I am there, I am there, I am there. The sense of I dominates the human consciousness. This self-awareness comes from this Maheshwara principle. And because of that only, the creation of a Jivatma in the human constitution happens. Let us be very, very clear. The human constitution, the whole of human constitution is divided broadly into two, as the Dehatma and the Jivatma, as the lower quaternary and the upper triad. The physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, and the lower mental body form the lower quaternary, which is called as the Dehatma. This set of four bodies, in fact, the astral and mental are not exactly two, but very closely associated with each other, and therefore, in Vedantic terms, it is called only as Manomaya Kosha. So there is this Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, and Manomaya Kosha. The Manomaya Kosha in the theosophical parlance and the theosophical literature is divided into two, as the astral and the mental, lower mental. So this Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya Kosha form the Dehatma. The higher mind, the Buddhi and the Atma constitute the Jivatma, or the upper triad, Atma Buddhi Manas. In other terms, in the Vedantic terms, you refer to it as the Antahkarana. Manas, Buddhi, Ahankara, and Chitta. That refers to the Antahkarana. Broadly speaking, we can call that as the Jivatma principle, though not exactly corresponding with the interpretation of the given in the theosophical literature, but broadly it comes. So there is a Jivatma principle and a Dehatma principle. And above this is the Paramatma principle. So there is a Dehatma, Jivatma, and a Paramatma. Now, the important factor with regard to the Shiva Tattva is that the Maheshwara principle of the Trimurtis provides the link between the Jivatma and the Paramatma. He is responsible for creating and providing us with a link between the Jivatma and the Paramatma. We have earlier seen about the Jivatma, Ishvara and Paramatma. And we have said in that context that the Ishvara represents as the intermediary between the Jivatma and the Paramatma, or the Paramatma is what is called as the Brahman or the Shiva Tattva or the ultimate reality or supreme reality or whatever it is, whatever be the term you use, that's not of much consequence. But this principle provides you the link or the channel between the Jivatma and the Paramatma. This is the important aspect of the Shiva Tattva. Through manifestation as Maheshwara, who is essentially responsible for the very creation of the Jivatma principle. The causal body is not there in any other creatures. In any other creature in manifestation, there is no causal body. This is the very reason why the theosophical literature and the clairvoyant visions they had and recorded, where they said that once you are born as a human being, you can't go back to any animal or other, bodies. Why? Because the human body, there is an evolutionary process. There is no involution as far as the consciousness is concerned. Consciousness is ever evolving and ever unfolding, actually. I would rather use the term unfolding rather than evolving. The bodies evolve. Consciousness unfolds. So there is no causal body or the Karana Sharira in animals or any other creatures other than human beings. And therefore, if we have taken a human birth, the future births will also be human birth, is what is mentioned very clearly in the theosophical literature, based on this understanding that this principle of Jivatma or the causal body or the upper triad or this Antahkarana is a creation of that Maheshwara Tattva, who also provides a link between the Jivatma and the Paramatma. See, no creature other than the human being can become liberated. We may hear all kinds of stories, but don't go by stories that some cow got liberated, some bull got liberated. No. It's not a possibility at all, and there is no whimsical, or privileged path for creatures to suddenly become liberated. Only when the Jivatma or the upper triad or the causal body associated with the Atma Buddhi Manas or Manas Buddhi Atma, Janaki Ramji is favorite of calling it as MBA. That principle comes into being only in the human evolutionary state. And it is there the descent of the Maheshwara principle happens and the creation of a Jivatma Tattva is there, and he provides the link between the Jivatma and the Paramatma. This is the second point. Okay? Just give me 2 minutes time. I'll take a small break. I have a small thing to attend to. Just give me 2 minutes time. Don't go away. Please don't go away. I'm just switching off my video and making it mute. Just stay on for just 2-3 minutes. Hello. Yes. Sorry for the break. I had to attend to something urgent. Okay. So these two aspects, are they clear? The two aspects I have dealt with, two aspects of the Shiva Tattva. One is about the essential principle of Shiva being the ultimate reality and universal consciousness and unmanifest, whose essential nature is auspiciousness, goodness, and universal welfare. That is the first principle. The second point is that in manifestation, the Shiva Tattva represented as Maheshwara is responsible for the downpour of the universal consciousness in the creation of Jivatma and also providing a link with the Paramatma. So these are two aspects.
Sir, can I,
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
can you elaborate the part of the link aspect of it, that it provides a link for Jivatma to connect with Paramatma? What
Yeah,
exactly is the link?
Link is the Ishvara. Go back, connection. 1 minute. Yes, sir. See, we have earlier discussed, Umesh, if you remember earlier what we have discussed, that there is this Jivatma, Ishvara and Paramatma.
Yes.
The Paramatma can be called in any terms. Ultimate
Yes.
reality, universal consciousness, Shiva, supreme being, whatever terms you use, God. That the term is not important. So Ishvara is the interface between the Jivatma and the Paramatma.
No,
That link is provided by Maheshwara.
so in practical manner, in reality, if we are Dehatma and Jivatma, and by unfolding, by getting link of Maheshwara, you are then evolved to Paramatma. Now,
Yeah,
what I fail to understand is that as what we have spoken earlier, according to Advaita Vedanta, there is one Atma, there is one consciousness.
Correct.
So now here, the distinguish between Jivatma and Paramatma, and there is the intermediary
interface
force or intermediary Shiva Tattva or Maheshwara that connects us to Paramatma. How does that work?
Now, how does that work is, see, basically the Atma or the Jivatma is a conditioned aspect of universal consciousness.
Agree.
Through ignorance.
Agree.
Once that ignorance, the veil of ignorance goes away, it realizes that it is no different from Paramatma.
So, dropping the veil or getting rid of ignorance,
right,
is to connect to the Paramatma.
That's all. No, you need not. You don't connect actually. See what happens. It is already there.
Yes, I mean yes. There is no connection.
You only get rid of ignorance. That's why Adi Shankara also in the Bhagavad Gita says, Jnana is for removal of ajnana.
Right.
Jnana does not bring into existence the ultimate reality or anything like that, because jnana cannot be a cause or effect of something. Because the ultimate reality, or what you call as the Paramatma, is beyond all causation, and it is eternal. You understand the point?
Yes. So
the only thing you can do is get rid of your ignorance.
Correct. So the dropping or getting rid of ignorance is the doing part of us, or is it a Maheshwara Tattva that helps us or graces us?
That because that Maheshwara Tattva is on operation, it helps you.
Okay.
It provides you the information and the means to tell you that I have opened a channel and I have made a connection between the two. It is for you and me to discover that connection, that link, that channel.
So
the process of discovery is the sadhana.
Right. So there are two. Yes, sir. So please correct me if I get a right impression. There are two aspects. One is your effort, your own abhyasa or sadhana, and the second part is the grace of Maheshwara.
Obviously, see, the grace is not something which you are inviting. The grace is always there, sir. You don't recognize, you and I don't recognize it. It is
Yes.
like the sunlight. See, it is like the sunlight. We have enclosed ourselves in a dark room, closing all the doors and windows.
Yes.
So what is it that you and I need to do? Need to
Open the
open the
window.
doors and windows.
Yes. That's jnana.
Now, through jnana, you get rid of ignorance and you
Yes.
open the doors and windows. The sunlight is already there. It is ever present.
So dropping ajnana is the
Huh.
link that we are talking about here.
No, that factor of an inner yearning,
Yes.
which makes us move in the direction of knowing something beyond ourselves,
Yes.
is what is provided by the Shiva Tattva or the Maheshwara Tattva here.
That's it. So that's right. Okay.
Okay?
That's what I wanted.
Yeah, the yearning comes because he has connected you to that Jivatma.
Yes.
The animal
Mm.
consciousness has evolved into a human consciousness where a Jivatma principle is created. And in that principle, it is inherent. The link is inherent, the inbuilt.
Yes.
So human beings yearn for it.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes. I understand now. Thank you.
Right? Okay.
Yes. Right. Thank you.
Then we come to the third aspect. See, as I said in manifestation, it is the Shakti principle which dominates the whole process. But Shakti cannot operate independently in the absence of the Shiva Tattva, the Shiva principle being there. A similar analogy is given in the Sankhya system, where Prakriti dominates the whole creation, but it can operate only in the presence of the Purusha. And in fact, Vedanta insists that beyond the Purusha there is this ultimate reality, the Brahman, whose presence is essential for the activities of both the Purusha and the Prakriti. Sankhya only ends with Purusha. Sankhya doesn't go beyond Purusha, and they have a problem also. The reason why Sankhya says that there are infinite number of Purushas is because each individual, there should be a Purusha element in him or her. Let's not go into that academic or scholarly discussion into the terms that are used. What is important I am talking about in this context is that the Shakti on its own is totally untamed and wild flow of energy, force, and what we normally call as the principle which operates in nature. Power. Shakti, the literal translation is power. This power, energy, force, left to itself, would be totally wild and untamed if the Shakti principle alone were to operate. But it doesn't operate that way. It operates only through the presence of Shiva. In the presence of Shiva, the Shakti operates in an orderly manner. So the Shiva Tattva in manifestation again is the controller of the untamed and wild power or energy or force. And it is the Shiva Tattva which gives a direction and purpose for the whole creation. The creation should have a purpose, no? It's not created just for the heck of it. And in order to realize and understand what that purpose is, you need a direction also. Both these are provided by the controller of that Shakti, who is Shiva. This Shiva,
Sir,
in
we have
manifestation,
this.
yes,
Sir, we have this beautifully explained in Soundriya Lahari,
yes,
Shiva
yes.
Shakti. Yeah. So the opening thing begins with Shiva Shaktya Yukto. It
Yeah,
begins.
Shiva Shaktya Yuktaha.
Ah.
Yukta. Yeah.
So
Yes.
that is his Maya again. We call that Shakti. It is his Maya. Maya.
Which is Prakriti. Which is Prakriti in other form. Yeah,
Yes.
that's what you are saying is true. Correct.
Yeah.
So you
And
see
that
the
is Jagat. That is the Jagat which is created then.
yeah. This is
Yeah.
the whole creation. Creation comes through this power or energy or force. Unless that comes into manifestation, nothing can come.
Nothing can come. True, sir.
Right. So the whole thing has a purpose. The whole scheme of evolution has a purpose. And it has to move in a particular direction in an orderly manner. That purpose and direction is what is given by the Shiva Tattva. That's why symbolically it is represented as Ardhanarishwara. The Ardhanarishwara is a beautiful symbology or allegory or imagery that is created to demonstrate the dual nature of this manifestation, which cannot be separated. The two cannot be separated. Both of them have one body, but two aspects of the male and female, but one unit of manifestation. Shiva and Parvati cannot be separated. Shiva and Shakti cannot be separated, even in manifestation. The only factor is the Shakti part of it dominates the whole creation because that is necessary. You understand the point? So,
That is the creative power, sir.
yes, obviously,
that
that creative power is controlled by Shiva Tattva.
Yes. But the creative aspect is with her.
No, obviously, as I said,
Yeah.
I already made a mention, Meenaji, I said the Shakti aspect dominates the whole creation,
Yes. Correct. Yeah.
but cannot operate without the Shiva Tattva inherent in it.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
The Shakti Tattva is inherent and dormant and in a potential form in the unmanifest.
True. Very true. Yes.
In the manifest, it is what is potential becomes active along with the Shiva aspect of it. The Shakti aspect of it dominates the manifestation. But Shakti alone doesn't operate. The Shiva Tattva also is associated with it and it operates jointly. This is the third aspect I wanted to emphasize, because we are talking about the Shiva Tattva. I'm not going into the Shakti Tattva and the Shakti aspect of it. We're not going to dwell upon it. The Shiva Tattva is the controller of the Shakti, or he has the remote control. And because of that, there is a purpose and a direction for the whole of manifestation. This is the third point. Now, we come to the fourth point. The fourth aspect of the Shiva Tattva is that he is also the Pralaya Karaka. He is the destroyer of all creation. He is the one who brings about Pralaya. But the Tattva has to be understood that this Pralaya or this destruction and reabsorption of the creative principle is basically for regeneration, renovation, rejuvenation, or restoration of balance, or whatever you may call. Or whatever you may call. Because along with the destruction, there is constant creation also. The pralaya, there are daily pralayas. Day and night is a creation and destruction. Morning, there is activity. Night, there is sleep and dormancy. So this is a pralaya. And we are told that every day, everywhere in the whole of creation, this process of minor pralayas keep on going on happening. Destruction, creation, creation and destruction goes on and on and on at all levels, starting from our own body also. So many millions and millions of cells die every day, and new cells are born. Even in ordinary creation, we see there is construction, there is destruction, there is creation, there is destruction. That principle is also represented by Shiva. Therefore, he is called as the Pralaya Karaka. Finally, when the whole of creation is absorbed, only that is called as Mahapralaya. Mahapralaya, which happens in Kalpas, after say billions of years, where the whole earth is absorbed or the planetary system is absorbed and something else is created, yet the system talks about that also, but that is called as the Mahapralaya. All other things are called only Pralaya. They are minor Pralayas. So he is not only the destroyer, but he is also the regenerator. He is also the regenerator. He is the one who restores balance also. The destructive force is represented as Rudra and sometimes as Bhairava, the terrible one. So the Tattva includes this aspect of regeneration, renovation, rejuvenation and restoration of balance in the whole of creation through a continuous process of creation and destruction, creation and destruction. This is another important aspect of the Shiva Tattva. Then we will move to another very, very important dimension, which I am sure appears to be unpalatable and we are not willing to accept it so easily, is what is linked to the very first point which I made, that Shiva literally means that which is auspicious, that which is for the welfare of the universe, and that which is all that is good. Connected to that principle is a very deep secret, which is that Shiva also represents death. The beauty of this secret is understood when we realize that death is the most auspicious thing, that death is the most good or the best that can happen, and death is for the whole welfare of the creation. Just imagine if there were to be no death. There would be total chaos in a few years. In 1 or 2 decades, there will be total chaos in this world if there were to be no death. But unfortunately, through our ignorance, we consider death to be inauspicious, something bad, because our whole interest is selfish and personal. If our interest were to be the welfare of the whole world or the creation, the whole of creation, then we would understand the importance of death. You understand the beauty of it? This is a secret that is to be understood, that death in whatever form, at whatever place, at whatever time it comes, it is auspicious. And it is literally that, please understand, don't take me wrong, don't take me to be morbid or some kind of sadistic tendency that is being demonstrated here. When I said literally death in whatever form, to whomsoever, at whatever time and whatever place, is auspicious. That means whether somebody dies young or old, whether he dies a normal death or a death in accident, whether it happens today or after 100 years, whether whatever be the form, time and place, it is always auspicious. And from a higher spiritual dimension, it is something to be welcomed. I am told that there are some tribes in Africa who celebrate death and mourn birth. They celebrate death. When somebody dies, it's a big celebration. When somebody is born, it's a mourning. Because they recognize this higher principle. Unfortunately, we call them as tribes living in caves and jungles and don't understand the higher dimension of things, but they do. And the reminiscences of that great culture or civilization still remain, and those tribes practice this. Yes, madam. Yeah.
That's interesting, Krishnapani-ji, that they actually mourn birth, because when we are born again, we are still, we are still
Bound-
on the journey. We are still not
bound by
evolved.
karma.
Yeah.
Bound to suffer misery down here.
Yeah.
So another fellow has come to suffer the misery in this world.
Correct. Again, this is all, yeah.
It's something which is actually to be mourned.
Yes.
But that is the secret. That is the secret of the Shiva Tattva. This is a great rahasya. Because he represents death. And as I said, just look at the creation. If there were to be no death, what will happen to this earth? What will happen to people? What will happen to resources? What will happen to the whole of creation? Everything has to die. Whether it's a tree or a mountain or a human being or an ant or any creation. But let us not look at it with indifference. Let us not become hard-hearted by saying, yeah, death is something that natural and it is something auspicious. And one fellow called Krishnapani told us this, that it is very good and auspicious and all that. Therefore, I will become indifferent or hard-hearted or stoic about it. It's not that. One needs to be great. The whole of creation, the Shiva Tattva represents that great love and compassion, universe, which is universal. And another important secret from the theosophical literature is that death is a welcome feature for anybody at any time because it provides great rest. It provides a great period of rest and recuperation, R&R. It gives you a lot of, and that's why for a 70-year life, there'll be a 700-year or 1400-year gap between one incarnation and another incarnation. So a long time, 10 to 20 times that rest and recuperation is provided for a life of 70 or 80 or 90 years. Look at the whole system. Otherwise, if people were to be born immediately after death, again the world would have been too crowded, too much. Too many people would have simply come into this world. No, it doesn't happen that way. The average age has been found to be between 700 and 1000 years, Earth years, for a human being to reincarnate and come back. Obviously, there are outliers. There are people who can come much earlier, people who may not come after 2000 years also. There are all variations are there, but if you take a normal curve, between 2 sigma, 95% is covered. The outliers will be in the 5% on either side. So let's not bother about that and question the whole theory or the system as such. So you see, Shiva is therefore shown to be a dweller of the cremation ground. He is said to be dwelling in the cremation ground permanently. And he is smeared with ashes of the dead bodies. You know, in Ujjaini, you have the Mahakaleshwara, one of the Dwadasha Jyotirlingas. Early morning, 3 o'clock, they bring a fresh ash from the cremation grounds and perform Abhisheka to Mahakaleshwara in Ujjain. You see the symbology and the allegory behind it. And what is the name given to the Jyotirlinga there? Mahakaleshwara. He is Kala. He is time the destroyer, which is again what Sri Aurobindo says in the essays on the Gita. And that is where Umeshi started. And he is the cause for today's meeting. Kala, because in the Bhagavad Gita he says, I am Kala, Kalosmi. I am the Kala, I am the time. And he is, Maheshwara is Mahakala. And in Hindi, Kala also represents darkness, ignorance. And what is the single factor which all of us would like to have? One power. If one power were to be given to human beings, and anybody with some deep thinking on the subject would realize that the biggest challenge is the uncertainty of future, isn't it? So one boon, if somebody were to come and say, give you one boon, an intelligent fellow would like to have that power of looking into the future, isn't it? But that's not given to anybody. You get that only when you cross this requirement. He is that Mahakala. Time is the most difficult principle to be understood or absorbed or accepted, because we do not know what is going to happen the next moment. So he represents that Mahakala, he represents that, and time is also the element which is required for creation and destruction, and Shiva represents that aspect of death. And in that context, death is the most auspicious and the most important element as for the welfare of the whole of creation, and it also represents goodness. Unfortunately, through our ignorance, we don't accept it and we don't want to accept it, and it's always painful from an individual point of view. But the Shiva Tattva is not concerned with individual pain and pleasure. It is a universal principle in operation, which is for the welfare of the whole of the creation. This is one secret which we have to very clearly understand. Then I am going to tell you another secret, very important secret again about the Shiva Tattva. The Shiva Tattva, in one context, Shiva is called as the awakener. Shiva is called as the awakener. Professor Ravi Ravindra brings out this factor in one of his books. Shiva is the great awakener. Why? Because he is the one who created the link and the channel between the Jivatma and the Paramatma. And what is it that truly awakens a human being? Misery and death. Isn't it? What is it that truly awakens a person? If he is suffering and if he is encountering death. So, the other dimension of death is awakening. Awakening to what? Dying to ignorance and awakening to wisdom. Dying to ajnana and awakening to jnana. Dying to mortality and awakening to immortality. You understand the point now? Why he is called as the awakener? And that is the secret in the Mrityunjaya mantra. The Mrityunjaya mantra, Trayambakam yajamahe sugandhim pushtivardhanam urvarukamiva vandhanan mrityor mukshiyamamrutat. He is called as Trayambaka. You know what is the meaning of Trayambaka? Trayambaka has two meanings. The literal meaning is he is the repository of all the three Shakti aspects. Amba means Shakti. What are the three aspects of it? The Lakshmi, Saraswati and Durga. Prosperity, wisdom and valor. Lakshmi represents prosperity. Saraswati represents wisdom. And Durga represents courage and valor. The repository of all these three forces, as I mentioned in the Shiva Shakti Tattva, are in Shiva. Therefore, he is called as Trayambaka. And interestingly, Trayambaka also means ashes. Generally, for Vibhuti, they use the term Trayambaka also. So we are worshipping that Trayambaka, who is the confluence of all the three forces of manifestation in the form of prosperity, wisdom, and courage and valor. Trayambakam yajamahe. Sugandhim. This ash gives out a fragrance of death on one side and immortality on the other side. And what for is destruction? Is for regeneration, renovation, and rejuvenation and restoration of balance. How does it happen? Pushtivardhanam. He is the one who gives you the energy, the food or the nourishment. Pushtivardhanam means one who increases your nourishment, who gives you more and more of that strength. And what is it? The symbology in that Urvaruka means it is a cucumber. It's a big size cucumber, yellow cucumbers, which are actually very heavy. If you have seen a cucumber, it is actually a creeper. It grows as a creeper, and it's quite heavy. Almost each one could weigh out half a kilo or even more. But it is held by a very, delicate thread. The moment you twist the fruit, it falls down. It comes into your hand. So it is held very lightly. Held very lightly. Just give a twist, it will fall down. Or you allow it to ripen, it will fall down on its own. That's called the Urvaruka. So my association or my link with death should be like the Urvaruka Bandhana. So it has a dual meaning. One is, give me a death which is effortless, which is peaceful. And the second one is, release me from mortality, which is association with ignorance. Don't relieve me from that immortality, Mahamritat. I'm not seeking relief from that immortality. I want that immortality, and I want the mortality in the form of ignorance to be released. Urvarukamiva bandhanan mrityor mukshiya. Urvarukamiva bandhanat. From that, like that of a whatever you call it as cucumber, or we have all varieties of them which are held very lightly, which is also a representation, represents that bandha represents mrityu. Bondage is death. Liberation is immortality. So give me that, don't give me this. So when you are uttering the Mrityunjaya mantra, don't pray for longevity of this body. Unfortunately, all these so-called priests and all, when somebody is ill or somebody doesn't want to die, they say we will perform Mrityunjaya Japa, Mrityunjaya Homam, Mrityunjaya mantra and all that. The Mrityunjaya mantra is for easy release and getting there and dying fast. And as I said, the earlier it occurs, the better it is from a manifestation, from a point of view of karma. The longer we live, the greater is our involvement in karma. Isn't it? We get involved and entangled in all unnecessary things, and it goes on and on and on. If you live for 100 years, you are entangled for a longer period of time. So it's not the longevity of the body and longevity through ignorance. It is that eternal longevity through self-realization and free from all ignorance and bondage that is sought after through this Mrityunjaya mantra. So he is the awakener. He is the awakener, and awakening, as I said, can only happen when we are directly in contact with suffering and sorrow, decay and death. They are very important. Like in medical science, they say pain is the best thing that can, for best thing for the body. Because pain is a beautiful indicator of that something is wrong. If we were to suffer no pain, we would have been totally wild and uncontrolled and behave in a reckless manner totally. You eat more, you suffer. You sleep more, you suffer. You eat less, you suffer. You sleep less, you suffer. This pain and suffering are very, very important from a medical point of view also. And from a spiritual point of view, they are indicators for awakening. And the Shiva Tattva represents that awakening and subjugation of all lower passions. That is the reason why symbolically on a Shivaratri, you are supposed to do fasting and also spend the night without sleeping. Fasting is a subjugation of the overactivity of the senses and the body. And not sleeping during that night of Shivaratri is awakening, is symbolic of the state of awakening. That's why the Bhagavad Gita says, Yanisha sarva bhutanam tasyam jagrati sanyami yasyam jagrati bhutani sanisha pashyato mune. In the second chapter, I think it's the 69th verse or so, there he says, what is night for the ordinary human beings is like the day or a period of awakening for the great yogi. What is night for the yogi is the day or the awakening for the ordinary people. Yasyam jagrati bhutani. When the ordinary persons are awake, the yogi is asleep. For him it is night. In the sense he is not involved in anything pertaining to the worldly matters. So what appears as night for ordinary people is the state of awakening for a samyami, a true yogi. So this also, the symbolism of keeping awake and fasting on Shivaratri is a cultural tradition which has come about to represent that state of awakening. Awakening to our own higher being, the presence of our own higher consciousness, you awaken to it, and therefore he is called as the Mahayogi. And very interestingly, we are also told that the Lingodbhava happens in the midnight, happens at midnight. The emergence of the Linga will not go much into it, but the Lingodbhava time is given to be sometime in the middle of the night. So this is another dimension of the Shiva Tattva. Then we will come to another interesting aspect, which is the representation of the total sense of serenity and detachment of Shiva. Shiva is always in a very calm, quiet, serene posture with his eyes half closed and half open. That means he is aware of everything and he is unconcerned of everything. He is aware because he is awakened one. He is an awakener himself. So the half closed eyes, half open and half closed, represent that on one side he is aware of everything that is going on. On the other side, he is absolutely unconcerned and totally detached from the world. He doesn't bother whatever happens because the pralaya, the other forms of Shiva, the other aspects of Shiva are already in manifestation and they will take care of the creation and destruction. He will be totally awakened only at the time of Mahapralaya when he will do the Tandava. When he will do the Tandava, nothing can withstand that destructive force. You see the symbology in the Nataraja. Nataraja He is symbolized with his hair loosened, and in a severe, very aggressive posture of dance. Everything has a symbology of its own. We can't go much into that symbology also, but basically he is the one who is totally serene and detached. He represents that spirit of serenity and detachment. And we have two very interesting stories. One is the story of the Daksha Yajna. Shiva is married to Dakshayani. Parvati comes later on in the allegorical Puranas and stories. He's first married to Daksha Prajapati's daughter, which Daksha is not very happy about the marriage, and he doesn't respect Shiva. He doesn't give him the due importance. But Dakshayani, Daksha Prajapati's daughter, insists upon marrying, and there was a general this thing about Swayamvara, that the girl has the right to choose the husband. So when she has chosen, he allows it to happen, but he doesn't respect it, or doesn't give any due importance to Shiva. Once it so happens that Daksha Prajapati wants to perform, we'll come to the third eye, sir. Daksha Prajapati is performing a yajna where he invites everybody. Brahma, Vishnu, everybody is invited except Maheshwara, the Shiva. And his wife, obviously, his wife is also not interested. In fact, his whole grouse is because his daughter has married Shiva. But Dakshayani insists, saying that after all, I'm going to my own father's house. I'll go and attend the yajna. Shiva says, don't do it. He has not invited you. Why do you want to go? And obviously, you know that he has not, both of us are not welcome there. Why do you go? He says, no, it's after all my father, my Maika, my own house, place where I was born and brought up, and he is my father. So therefore, I'll go. Shiva says, it's left to you. And she ultimately goes there, and the father insults her. So why the hell did you come? You were not invited here. And you are married to a useless fellow. And therefore I did not invite him also, and all that. The story goes on. And finally she is so disturbed that she creates a fire of her own and burns herself to ashes. Dakshayani is burnt to ashes. Then Shiva comes to know about it, and he sends one dimension of his consciousness in the form of Rudra. Rudra goes there and destroys the whole yajna. He sees that the yajna is not performed, and the complete destruction of the yajna is done. This is the symbology behind it. This is the imagery and the allegorical story. The point to be understood from this is that Shiva is also the primary Yajnadipati. He is the Yajnadipati. No yajna or no auspicious activity for the welfare of creation can be carried out in the absence of Shiva, which Daksha wanted to do. And therefore, the yajna was destroyed. This symbology has to be related to another important aspect, because we have already, I think we have gone about for almost 1 hour, 20 minutes. Maybe another 10-15 minutes time. If it is there, I'll wind it up. But basically the idea is, there is what is called as the representation, allegorical representation and imagery of Shiva as the Ashtamurti. Shiva, Bhava, Ishana, Rudra. These are all 8 forms of Shiva are there. The Ashtamurti The 8 forms represent the 5 Panchamahabhutas, the sun, the moon, and Yajna. These are the 8 forms, 8 aspects of Shiva, and therefore they are represented as the Ashtamurti, 5 Mahabhutas. I was just reading some other literature connected with it. The Bhairava aspect is connected with Akasha. In the Shiva Sutras, this aspect is brought out. I'll not go into that Ashtamurtis, but broadly I am trying to tell you that the Ashtamurtis are representative of the 5 Panchamahabhutas, the sun, the moon, and the Yajna. From a Vedic point of view, if you see, these are the 8 most important aspects in a human being's life, isn't it? The 5 elements, earth, water, air, fire, and Akasha. Then what guides our day and night? The sun and the moon. And what do we want through this life? Prosperity. And who gives prosperity? Yajna gives prosperity according to the Vedic system, which is the Karma Kanda. So, Shiva is also called as the Yajnamurti. So, when Daksha wanted to perform a Yajna without the presence of the Yajnamurti, obviously it was destroyed. And in the process, what has happened? Dakshayani is burned to ashes. So he goes back into his own samadhi. He goes back into his own consciousness. He doesn't wake up now. Earlier he was awake and half, his eyes were half closed and half open. Now it's completely shut and he goes into his own inner being and he doesn't wake up. Then there is again a problem in creation. This is the allegory. Allegorically, if Shiva closes his eyes, there's not a problem in the whole of creation. Then Daksha Prajapati's daughter Dakshayani is born as Himalaya Parvata's daughter, as Parvati. She remembers her background and then she starts doing penance, saying that Shiva is my husband and I have to gain him back. In order to gain him back, I have to perform tapasya. So she takes up severe austerities. She goes to such extremes that in the process of fasting, she comes to a stage where she was only eating dropped leaves from the trees. That means you don't even pluck a leaf or a fruit or anything. She was only eating dropped leaves. And ultimately she gave up that also. And because she gave up that, her name became Aparna. Parna means a leaf. Aparna means a person who has stopped even consuming leaves. Dropped leaves, dead leaves also she stopped consuming. And therefore, it is a name is given to her, calling her as Aparna. Then what happens? He is not, in spite of so much of tapasya and austerity, Shiva is not waking up. So to instigate him, all the devas and the others put together, they say to Manmatha, the Lord of Love, to instigate him. Poor fellow, he thinks that all the great responsibility has been given to me by all the devatas and other divine beings, and he tries to go and instigate incite Shiva to become amorous so that he will marry Parvati. What happens? He opens the third eye and he destroys Manmatha completely. That's what is the story and the allegory of Kamadahana. Kama means desire. All desires have to be converted into ashes. Knowing the reality of the nature of the desire, you have to destroy them. So this is another allegorical aspect of Kamadahana. Finally, when he does this Kamadahana and he comes to know that Dakshayani is again born as Parvati and trying to come back and wants to become his consort, he accepts and then Parvati becomes his wife. The story apart, I'll not go much into it, but the symbology behind it is that one needs to be totally detached, totally free from all desires, and not be concerned with anything worldly except the welfare of the world, actions which are for the welfare, loka sangraha. So the Shiva Tattva represents that serenity and ultimate state of detachment. So you see the beauty of the stories that are created around these things. But the essence of the Tattva to be realized is this aspect of becoming totally serene and detached from the world in order to be linked to his ultimate reality, his universal consciousness that goes with it. This is another dimension which is there. Now, what is important is that the ultimate reality is represented by the Shiva Tattva as the divine consciousness or the universal consciousness, the Shakti Tattva as the divine power in manifestation. And a very interesting third dimension comes into it through the interaction of the Shiva and Shakti Tattvas, through the divine consciousness and divine power, they bring into being what is called as the Chitta. The association of these two things, Binaji, I am coming to your point, how the Chitta comes into it is through the association of the divine consciousness and divine power. This is what is brought out in the Shiva Sutras. The Shiva Sutras brings out this particular aspect of that unity of the divine consciousness and divine power to manifest as the Chitta, which is a product of these two aspects. See, the Shiva Tattva has to be understood at different levels. There is another dimension which I want to mention very, because we do not normally give our thought to it, but some amount of thought reveals to us one beautiful thing. While Shiva is represented in a physical form with long hair, matted hair, and Ganga on his head and Parvati on his side, there is a Trishula, there is a Damaruka, there is a elephant skin as his dress, and snakes, a snake around his neck. All this representation has got its own symbology, but we never worship Shiva in this physical form anywhere. It is only worshipped in the form of a linga. It is always the lingakara. You see, any Jyotirlinga, it's called as a Jyotirlinga, he is always worshipped in the form of a linga. There is a great secret behind this linga. The linga, along with that thing which is around it, is symbolic of the Shiva and the Shakti Tattvas, number one. At a grosser level, it represents the physical union of Shiva and Shakti also. But we are more concerned with the very shape of the linga. The shape of the linga is an ovoid. It is an ovoid, or in mathematical terms, it is called as an ellipsoid. It's an ellipsoid. That means if there is a sphere, you press the sphere, it becomes an elongated ellipsoid. So the linga is an ellipsoid actually. And what happens when you press a sphere? Normally a sphere will have only one center. The moment it becomes an ellipsoid, you have two foci. You have two centers. So this ellipsoid represents a duality, and these two foci are connected to represent that Jivatma Paramatma Tattva, and the connection between the lowest and the highest. So when it is established in a temple, the lower part is in the earth and the higher part is in the Akasha, symbolically. So this ellipsoid is the representation of the universe. If you see the planetary system, the solar system, if you see, all planets move around the sun in an elliptical orbit. The orbit is not circular. If it were to be circular, things would not have been what they are. It's only in an elliptical form they move around the sun. And because of this elliptical form, they come closer and farther from the sun. Therefore, the seasons are created. There is a point here and there's some ellipse going on. At one point, the sun becomes is there at one focus. Then when it goes around that way, it becomes the other focus. So it's always in an elliptical shape, and the universe also, scientifically also, they say that it is not spherical or circular, but it is ellipsoid. So the ellipsoid is a symbol of the universal manifestation. So it represents, the linga represents that aspect of it. The dual aspect of it through two centers or two foci or focus points, and one representing the lower and the other representing the higher, one connecting the Jivatma, the one representing the Jivatma and the other the Paramatma, one associated with the earth, the lowest or the grossest form of element, the other representing the being higher and above, representing the Akasha Tattva. And very interestingly, these lingas are made from different materials. In the Amarnath, the linga is naturally made out of ice. In Rameshwaram, it is made out of sand. It is called Rameshwara because Rama formed that linga from the sand of on the banks of the ocean, on the ocean shore. Basically, it is silicon dioxide. It is made of silica. There are some lingas which are made of other tattvas, other dhatus. And some are made of some special rocks. These are again energy centers, and some studies going on where they found that the places where these lingas are established have a great energy radiating from them, and they are all in the same longitude also. The major Jyotirlingas are all on the same meridian or the same longitude, Some of them may be slightly deviating here and there, but closely associated with that one particular longitude. And some of them are said to be radiating some radioactive radiations also coming from them. So these are great energy centers which are formed or which are created to represent that Shiva Tattva as an ovoid or an ellipsoid, which has got all the symbolism that goes with it, and it is established as a great energy center. And in order to see that the energy is in a controlled form, in a limited manner, so that people can absorb it conveniently, a temple is constructed. In the Agama Shastra, you have a very detailed and very strict rules of constructing a temple. The Garbhagriha, what should be the dimensions, what should be the dimension of the Gopura or the top part of it, which is always in 7 steps. That's why it's called as a Vimana. One of the meanings of the term Vimana is a 7-storied building. A 7-storied building is called as a Vimana. So this Vimana is, if you see normally the South Indian, these things, and even I think in North India, you have this it is built in 7 steps. And the linga is exactly down below the topmost point. If you drop a pendulum kind of thing, you will find that it's exactly coinciding with that. So in order to both concentrate the energy for maximization of its impact and also radiation of it for it in a larger area around it. Simultaneously, 1 second please. So, this is the true tattva of Shiva in the form of a linga which is worshipped universally everywhere. Shiva in his form is never worshipped. The form of Shiva Parvati, Ardhanarishwara and all that is only for creating images. But the worshipping part of it is always in the form of a linga. And the lingakara is the most important element which sustains the energy levels of the spiritual energy levels of the earth. The importance of that was recognized in the ancient Indian culture and tradition, and therefore these things were formed. And very interestingly, Ujjaini happens to be the actual meridian. Unfortunately, what has happened is they shifted it to Greenwich. Technically and scientifically, Ujjaini represents that exact meridian point of intersection for the determination of time. The Britishers subsequently, through their conquest and their own scientific development and understanding, have created the Greenwich GMT. But scientifically, you will find, you can Google it and you will find that that Ujjaini represents that exact meridian intersection for the actual, if the world time were to be determined, this should be the 0 point. So you can Google it and you'll find a lot of interesting literature on that, interesting information on that. So this is what is actually protecting not only the whole world, but more specifically being located in India, in the subcontinent, which is called as the Bharatavarsha and Bharatakhanda. This is what is actually protecting us. The Shiva Tattva in manifestation through the radiation of this energy, which is perpetually happening. And in order to see that this radiation does not go out of hand, the Agama Shastra and the other Shastras have prescribed specific systems for worship. That's why, in order to see that the linga doesn't get overheated, doesn't get out of control through its radiation and all, the Gopura and the temple is constructed through proper Agama Shastra rules, and they offer milk, they offer water, they offer honey, they offer ashes, they offer leaves, all these, and ghee. All these things are offered to preserve the linga in its pristine form, and through that offering, the energy is absorbed by the material that is put on it, the ghee or the milk or the honey or the water, and that is offered as the prasada or tirtha. That is offered as the sacred water, because it absorbs all that energy. It not only preserves the pristine purity and the energy flows, but also that energy is absorbed by the materials, and that material, when consumed, is supposed to be universally beneficial for your physical health, for your mental health, for your spiritual health, for health in all respects. It is important. So this is the symbolism, and this is the reality behind the linga and the worshipping of the linga. So this, very broadly, I have taken a lot of time. I have tried to almost more than 1.5 hours. But this broadly covers the whole thing of what we call as the Shiva Tattva. And finally, I just want to answer Ramchandranji. See, the third eye is called as the Jnana Chakshu. The Jnana Chakshu is represented, is the pineal gland, which is supposed to be about 1.5 inches inside the skull, behind the forehead. Exactly behind the forehead, about 1.5 inches inside, is the pineal gland, whose awakening is connected to the Sahasrara, to that chakra. And the opening up or the blossoming of that, and the opening up of that pineal gland gives you all supernatural powers. But this is something which is not to be attempted casually, and this is not something which we should go about just like that, casually. So that is what is the third eye. And the opening of the third eye represents that you become Trikalagnya. You become somebody who knows the past, present, and future in one shot. You will see the whole dimension of Kala, and you become Kalatita. You go into a dimension which is timeless, and at the same time, you can see the whole dimension of time in operation. So you become Trikalagnya and Kalatita also. This is a very brief symbolism of the third eye, which is representative of that representation of what I said is called as the pineal gland. Pineal gland is supposed to be a small pea-sized gland inside. You will get a lot of scientific information about pineal gland, but not the spiritual dimension of it. You may get the biological and other dimensions of it, but from the Indian perspective, from the Kundalini Yoga and the chakras, it is supposed to be the one which is responsible and which is to be awakened, whereby the Sahasrara chakra becomes fully blossomed, fully open. The 1,000-petaled lotus. So very briefly, Ramchandranji, I think I have answered your question. Are there any further questions? Umeshji? This is all because of you.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate. But this does not end here. It opens up many other points. But we will.
Yeah.
You remember,
Yeah.
I've been talking about the Satyam Shivam Sundaram, also associated with the Mahadeva Shiva.
Yeah.
So that is something that you have promised to talk about.
Yeah, we will talk about Satchidananda, Satyam Shivam Sundaram. We'll talk about those things at the appropriate time.
So I conclude this way. What my point yesterday about why is Shiva known as the first yogi or Adipurusha? Adipurusha because you mentioned as a Maheshwara part, the first Purusha, Maheshwara, and yogi because he is the awakener, awakening, and
Yes.
awakened.
Yes.
And therefore,
Yes.
that's all about yoga.
Yeah.
So,
Is the awakener. Yeah.
yes. And it is because of Maheshwara that we are in the process of sadhana or dhyana and,
Yeah.
and abhyasa that you ignorance is dropped.
Yeah.
And therefore, you realize the Shiva Tattva. My last observation is, why do we always, I know it is just for the sake of talking that we say Shiva as a he and Shakti as a she, but actually it is just it or that because it's energy. It's just the consciousness which is energy.
Whenever it comes into manifestation, we talk about the positive and the negative dimensions. We talk about the polar opposites. They are not actually polar opposites, but they are polarities which are complementary to each other.
Yeah.
Shiva represents one polar aspect of it. The Shakti represents the other polarity, which in all dimensions, whether you talk in terms of electromagnetic energy or we talk in any terms, in any form of energy, there is a positive dimension and a negative dimension. Don't take it, a negative dimension doesn't mean something bad. It's only a polarity. See, all life essentially for us is electromagnetic in nature. And whether it is electricity or magnetism, there is polarity. In electricity, you call it as positive and negative. In magnetism, you call it as south pole and north pole, and things like that. It's only that polarity, and that polarity is also represented by this ellipsoid. When there are two foci in an ellipsoid, this polarity is represented by that. So don't take it as masculine and feminine. Masculine and feminine also, in wires also you call them as male wire, female wire. It is not gender. It is not the gender aspect of it.
And,
but it is the polarity aspect of it.
But as a tattva, as a Shiva tattva, which is the element, it's an energy. Is
yes,
that
it's
correct?
only divine. It's only that universal consciousness and that ultimate reality. And as I made a mention in my discussion also, the Shakti Tattva is inherent in Shiva.
Right.
Is in the potential form in Shiva, in the unmanifest state. And when it comes into manifestation, that Shiva Tattva is dormant and the Shakti Tattva becomes active.
Yes, that's right. Like Shiva's driving force is the
actual aspect that is working.
Yes.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
sir. Yes, sir. We call it as potential energy and kinetic energy.
Right. Absolutely. Binaji, yes, agree. Amazing clarity of the Shiva Tattva. Can we also do a session on Brahma and Vishnu Tattva? The Tattvas. Yeah, we can discuss so many things. Maybe I think it is time that in a couple of months we can have physical sessions at the School of Ancient Wisdom. We are missing that.
Yeah.
We are missing that intimacy of all being together in the School of Ancient Wisdom. We will do it. Maybe I think in the next couple of months, most of us would have had their shots.
Finished. Yeah.
Both the shots. I am yet to take it sometime next week. I am planning to take my first shot. So hopefully by that, in a couple of months, things will we will be able to come and meet physically with a lot of more confidence, while still being careful. Sir, anything to add? I think Ramchandranji, or where is Mr. Janaki Ramji has left just now, I think.
Yeah.
Ramchandranji, if there is nothing else, we can close it. Huh? Nothing
Okay.
further. I think we have taken enough time. It's already. Yes, sir.
You revealed wonderful secrets of Shiva. I never knew. Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you so much. No, I was also inspired because when they asked me, or I, in fact, we have a close family circle where I am asked to speak on Thursdays, and this Thursday it happened to be Shivratri, and therefore I gave this talk in Telugu. So I had made a lot of notes and other things on this, and I thought I should share with all of you who are also like we are all one family.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Wonderful
so much.
gesture, sir. Wonderful gesture.
Thank you so much. Sajini is here.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much, Mr. Krishnapani ji, for explaining the Shiva Tattva so beautifully. You know, you went through so many different aspects and all the stories with the symbolic meaning. Of course, in the end, as you told us, that we need to be detached and linked to the universal force. So thank you so much. And we look forward to the sessions, as you said, at the School of Ancient Wisdom. And this was really more meaningful because it's Shivratri time. And for me specifically, because yesterday I went to 2 temples. One was that old Bogeshwar temple at the foothills of Nandi Hill. And the other was a beautiful Shakti temple about 80 or 90 kilometers from here, both very ancient ones. So it was so meaningful, you know, getting all these
So
explanations.
you seem to have absorbed a lot of positive energy through those 2 visits.
Yes, yes. You know, you can actually feel it. Amazing. There was a festival going on. And I heard later, I read that Shivaratri went on till 3 o'clock yesterday.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
actually. So I felt very good that I did both the temples on Shivaratri.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you so
Nice.
much. And we look forward to face-to-face sessions at the School of Ancient Wisdom shortly, because as you said, most of us have been vaccinated, and we can have our weekend sessions at the School of Ancient Wisdom. So thank you once again, and we will end with the Loka Samasta.
We have this evening program today, I think, no? Today we have this Swami Chidananda.
Yeah, we have Swami Chidananda's talks
and tomorrow
today.
our regular program on Atma Bodha.
Tomorrow will be Atma Bodha also. But all the people I can see are on our WhatsApp, so they must be reading our WhatsApp messages. There aren't any new people there. So do join, and we will end with the Loka Samasta. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Guru Bhyo Namah. Thank you everyone for being with us.